Story 1. The absence of a schedule and not needing to be anywhere at a specific time or within a time frame was wonderful. Story 2. I enjoyed going on a 2 to 3 hour hike with my dog every day while I was off work due to the closure of programs. I was fortunate to live on a large property that backed onto a trail system. It is especially nice to reflect on this now since my dog passed away not long after the pandemic. It feels good knowing that we spent so much extra time together. Story 3. As much as I disliked wearing masks, I also appreciated them. I have significant social anxiety, and they truly helped reduce my anxiety in public places. Story 4. As an introvert whose income was not affected at all, what was there not to like? There were no excuses needed for not attending events, and the lack of traffic made it peaceful. Story 5. It was nice to see the parks and sidewalks full of people during the day. The platform was filled with genuine users, not many automated accounts. Story 6. My husband was home every day. Families spent time together. Bikes and games were sold out in every store we visited. Families were a priority again. Story 7. Full-time work from home would be nice to sell my house and move somewhere cheaper. It feels unnecessary to commute to the office to do the same job that I could be doing from home. Story 8. Social distancing has become a norm. People used to crowd my personal space in public, but now I enjoy the break. Story 9. Face masks really helped my social anxiety. Having something on my face made me feel a little hidden. Story 10. Wearing a mask meant I wasn't told to smile by unwanted attention from men. In fact, I found that I was left alone much more when wearing a mask. Story 11. Masks allowed people to avoid coughing germs all over the place when I was forced into public. An added bonus was being able to pretend you didn't recognize the people you didn't want to talk to. Story 12. No secret, I loved quarantine. It was one of the best times of my life. I was very fortunate to have 9 months without work while still getting paid. Yes, please. Story 13. Online school for me felt like no school at all. All assignments were completed during the Zoom class, so I had little to no homework. After classes, my best friend and I would always play Minecraft together, and it's a really good memory for me. Story 14. There was something to the video calls with friends. We managed to catch up with and talk to more friends more regularly during that time than ever before. My wife and I would have a drink on the couch with 3 other couples, all doing the same. We would talk for a few hours. It is practically impossible to get all 4 couples together at the same time, but no one had anything else to do, so it became quite regular. Story 15. Lockdown was truly the happiest period of my adult life. Being away from work for several months with full pay was simply amazing. Story 16. Most of the comments are not secretive. I thought someone would post that they were glad people who deserved to die had died or something even worse, like the pandemic eliminating the vulnerable. Story 17. Social distancing in stores, without having people breathe down my neck while I am waiting at the checkout. Story 18. Before COVID, I worked over 50 hours a week and attended school full-time. My days were fully committed from 5 a.m. to midnight. Then, overnight, I started working 24 hours a week and taking online classes. I had enough money and time. I think that must be what retirement is like. Being able to relax, enjoy hobbies, and work for fun without constantly worrying about whether the bills will get paid. I'm glad I got to experience it, even if it was just for a few months. Story 19. Having a respected reason for not wanting guests or visiting people was helpful. Although it took some arguing, it was great when I had my children because the most I had to deal with during my postpartum recovery was a quick visit from the grandparents, and I didn't have to hand over my baby if I didn't want to. I experienced a challenging time with my in-laws and setting boundaries during my first pregnancy, so it was a huge relief to keep them away while they adjusted back to reality. Story 20. Working from home. Everyone was frustrated about having to stay inside and not see people. I was content to work in an environment free from distractions. Story 21. Receiving those $800 checks was fortunate. I paid off debt and purchased items for my house. I also bought nicer clothes. Story 22. Everyone had time to play video games. Outside was always eerily quiet. No one bothered to socialize, which was a significant advantage. Story 23. The time off was significant. I was an essential worker, so I still went to work, but the business did not open for the season, and we only worked a few days a week. I am on a salary, so I received the same pay. That was the only time in the last 14 years that I was able to enjoy spending summer with my family. Story 24. No pressure to do anything resulted in accomplishing a lot. Now that the pressure is back, I've seriously fallen behind. Story 25. On weekends, my husband and I would have dance parties and drinks at home. I enjoy going out to bars or restaurants, but it is nice to stay in. Story 26. Working from home full-time during light traffic has allowed me to learn new skills, such as cooking and playing guitar. Story 27. I had just moved to Japan at the start of COVID-19. The country did not shut down like other places, so I was able to travel around a bit and spend my weekends hanging out in the city without it being overly crowded due to the lack of tourists. Bars were also more desperate for customers at the time and did not charge entry fees. I did not need reservations for most things either. Another side effect is that I was never treated as a tourist. If I were still there with the borders closed, I must be a resident. Now, everywhere I go, I am automatically assumed to be a tourist, which can be rather annoying. Story 28. I didn't have to physically go to work in a draining office. I got to be with my best friend all the time, enjoyed walks whenever I wanted, and spent time on my hobbies. I created many wonderful memories during this period and felt like I was truly living for once. Story 29. Aside from the health concerns, I mostly preferred quarantine. Unfortunately, it did introduce more options for food delivery services, which was detrimental to my finances, but I struggle with impulse control. Story 30. Having nowhere to go or anything to do, I had no idea how busy my schedule was until everything stopped. Story 31. Everything changed. The temporary layoff and unemployment benefits provided me with more income than my job did at the time. I had no schedule and could do whatever I wanted, exploring new hobbies. Those were the best times of my life, and I yearned for those days. Story 32. All of it. I would honestly go back in a heartbeat. I loved online school. I loved being indoors and everything. Story 33. It was a time of contrasts. At no other point will we have the opportunity to retreat to our cottage for over 6 months with our adult children. My husband worked from home while both children attended university remotely. It's fortunate that we enjoy each other's company. My husband successfully started a weight loss program and has lost 35 pounds. The only issue was that the 3 other members of my family viewed me as a source of constant support. It wasn't until everyone returned to their regular routines that I recognized the intensity of the situation. Story 34. Having an excuse to stay cozy in my house and not make any plans with anyone is just called isolating. Story 35. I am easily distractible. I remember thinking, I bet I could get so much done if I was just left alone for a while. Well, it happened. I had the most productive period of my life. I published 12 research papers and caught up on a substantial amount of reading. I also came up with a new idea for a research grant that was shortlisted for funding. Of course, there is no way I could have kept up that pace, and I was probably using work as an escape at the time. However, I have often thought that this world is just too fast and loud for me. Now, I have evidence to support that belief. So, I secretly enjoyed the peace and the slower pace that was somewhat enforced on us. Slowing down is not always a bad thing. Story 36. My first day at my first real job coincided with the start of the COVID-19 quarantine where I live. I work in childcare, and since everyone pulled their children out, my school had very few students. This situation provided me with a great opportunity to learn how to be an effective teacher. For the first 3 to 4 months, I never had more than 6 toddlers by myself, which allowed me some breathing room to create a good class schedule and learn how to manage tantrums. After the quarantine ended, I ended up caring for 9 to 12 toddlers by myself. I am very thankful for the experience, and I do miss it at times. Story 37. It took me 2 weeks before I really noticed the quarantine. I knew about it, but it wasn't a big deal. Then I learned that I do need social contact, just much less than my partner, for example. Story 38. Not having our weekly gathering, my partner used to host a get-together almost every Friday night with his friends, missing very few. They referred to it as their weekly safety meeting. 9 years later, COVID-19 happened, and I was quite grateful for the break. Story 39. No cars on the road. I was an essential worker, and it was extremely peaceful whenever I was out and about. Story 40. Not working. Spending time with my family at home, practicing unique hobbies, playing games without concern. It was like a second childhood, even though I was 20 years old. Story 41. Less traffic, cleaner air, spending time at home with my dogs and partner, improved unemployment benefits, no interest on my student loans, better parking, fewer animals in shelters, and a social break that I desperately needed. Story 42. Wearing a mask, a hat, and glasses allowed you to see my face, so I didn't have to wear makeup or do more than brush my hair. Story 43. Sitting in my apartment, chain smoking blunts and making money. On a more serious note, I miss my personal space being respected in public and people wearing masks when they're sick. It's ridiculous that after everything we went through, people still come to work with the flu and no mask. Story 44. How peaceful and beautiful the city was without thousands of people walking around all day. Story 45. The fact that people had to keep their distance was beneficial for me. I have a strong preference for personal space in public, so I appreciated the distance. The best part was when I had to take a flight and everyone maintained space. I had so much room. My mother passed away in February 2020, right before things took a turn due to the pandemic. The same week I returned to work, we were notified that we would have to work from home. For me, this was a blessing because I wasn't ready to be back at work as I was still grieving. I was able to be at home, process my feelings alone in my own space, while still working and receiving my salary. Story 46. People were actively cleaning public spaces. Waiting rooms with children's toys were regularly disinfected. Tables were wiped down between customers. Everything was kept clean. Story 47. I did not feel like I was behind in life or missing out because no one else was out there living life to the fullest either. Story 48. My friends became absorbed in unusual online content that completely altered their personalities and made them believe in aliens more than transgender individuals. Now we are no longer friends, so I feel like I saved myself a lot of trouble in the future. Story 49. My wife had to work from home, so although I needed to be quiet because she was teaching in our main room, I absolutely loved having her around all the time. I enjoy having her nearby, even if she is in another room and I can just hear her doing something. Story 50. I experienced a lack of traffic, but was fortunate to continue working. I used the downtime and reduced spending to pay for personal training, as those were the only individuals permitted in the gym due to crowd and germ control measures. It was the best money I have ever spent. Provided me with an opportunity to improve my health and gain knowledge I can use for the rest of my life. Additionally, it helped me stay sane during the lockdown. Story 51. I appreciated the changes it brought in me. It helped me love reading and history while discovering my passion for writing. Story 52. For the first time, we spent Christmas with my husband and daughter. There was no rushing through presents because we weren't going to my mom's or having my in-laws over. We stayed in our pajamas and took our time, just the three of us. It was glorious. We long for a relaxed Christmas again. Story 53. Roads were clear and gas was inexpensive. A COVID-19 vaccination card was required to enter anywhere. Felt like being a very important person. Story 54. I worked at the only brewery at the end of a dead-end street, with a large parking lot next to a public park in a city that allowed open carry, surrounded by cities and breweries that did not allow it. Everyone came to us for their drinking needs. We went from earning $2,000 on a Saturday night with up to 4 employees to an $8,000 night with just me behind the bar. With sales from six-packs, growlers, and pints, I was taking home $600 to $1,200 a night on top of my manager wage, working 4 nights a week. It was great until the owner mismanaged the income by opening 2 other taproom locations in the middle of the pandemic. right before he fired our brewing staff because they wanted more money for the extra work they were doing. We went from 12 taps down to 3 on a good day. After I quit, the business went belly up 8 months later. Story 55. The community of friends I made with fellow content creators on Facebook was special. While it may seem outdated now, during that time, everyone was engaged and appreciated the humorous posts we shared. Story 56. Working from home. My employer was completely opposed to it before the pandemic, but now allows all employees to work 3 days per week from home, and some of us have the opportunity to work remotely full-time now. Story 57. It finally led America to adopt tap-to-pay technology. Before COVID, such payment methods were occasionally seen in shops but were quite rare. Now, it is nearly impossible to find a shop that does not allow this payment option. Story 58. I was in a bad mental state during that time, but I really wish I could go back sometimes and actually enjoy not doing anything. I loved taking walks when most of the streets were deserted. I would walk in the middle of the road with my headphones on, smoking a cigarette, and it would be so empty. I liked wearing a mask sometimes so I didn't have to smile at strangers, and I appreciated not being forced to socialize. Watching movies and shows all day without feeling guilty was enjoyable. Story 59. I moved to a new seaside town 2 months before it started to hit, and I loved that the friends I made there were all dog beach friends. We were at the beach first thing in the morning as long as it wasn't high tide, a great way to start the day, and we would inevitably run into someone from the group during walks later in the day. Maybe that would have happened without COVID, but it seemed more appreciated. 2 of my best friends to this day are from that first year. I feel very lucky. Story 60. We had a large group that used to play Jackbox or do quizzes together and catch up in the evenings over Zoom and Microsoft Teams. It had a real community vibe. When the lockdown ended, the group fell apart as everyone became too busy to meet in person. Story 61. I live in a town just off a downtown area. There is constant noise from vehicle traffic. When COVID-19 hit, it became very peaceful. Wildlife, such as foxes and deer, slowly started returning to the area. Story 62. Not feeling fear of missing out about events or trips I didn't take or couldn't attend. Everyone was stuck in their homes and not sharing their adventures or events. Story 63. FOMO disappeared, and friends who were really just an ongoing rotation of catching up over drinks fell away. Story 64. More access to online education and remote work has allowed me to complete a postgraduate certificate that I would not have been able to pursue otherwise. Story 65. It saved me from working at my old job where I was being sexually assaulted and harassed. I was in the process of leaving during that time as well, but the workplace kept trying to find ways to keep me there. Story 66. Costco was allowing only 2 people per membership into the store. No more families with screaming kids running around. No more groups of 3 or 4 adults with full carts blocking the main aisle. It was quiet and not crowded at all. I wish they had kept that policy in place. It was nice. Story 67. People should respect personal space. It was refreshing not to have someone behind me in line practically leaning on me. Story 68. I went to Costco early in the pandemic when Maricopa was the epicenter in the United States. During that time, a college biology professor from the University of California, Santa Cruz, who had worked with Richard Preston, the author of The Hot Zone, sent an email to every student he had ever taught, outlining the precautions we should take. When I went to Costco, I wore a painter's mask, bought a large freezer, and stocked up on beans and grains. Toilet paper seemed like a silly thing to hoard. Many of the individuals there either laughed at me or gave me strange looks, some even mocking me. While I stood in line, I tried to engage them in conversation, sharing my degree and discussing my talks with professors. I asked them about their ages, most of whom were seniors, and their health risks. Everyone laughed, but a few middle-aged women glanced at me with concern. I made it clear I wasn't foolish. I had consulted National Geographic and other bioscience organizations, and I knew this was serious. Sadly, some of the neighbors who had mocked me later passed away in the months that followed. I quietly understood their mindset, but I felt good about taking precautions. Story 69. Flying monthly up and down the left coast was enjoyable. The The planes were only a third full. It was the best experience. Story 70. I liked how socializing changed. Instead of meeting up at a bar or restaurant, we would hang out at my friend's house. They set up a table and chairs in their yard so we could maintain social distance. I have such fond memories of that summer. Story 71. I was recovering from a months-long bout of severe muscle weakness due to Lyme disease and Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So being able to lie down and rest throughout the day made a significant difference. I actually lost weight during lockdown because I was not so exhausted that I felt the need to drive through and eat junk food. Story 72. I was out of work for 2 months with pay and had a job I knew I could return to when things improved. I hate to say it, but it was lovely. I would wake up early every morning and either go for a walk or a bike ride, then read all day until my partner, who still went to work, came home. We would make dinner and watch movies, and it was just the long vacation I personally needed. Of course, I would give up that happiness even if it meant one person didn't die from COVID-19, but I don't have that kind of power. I can't help but be grateful for my health and my family's health and look back on that time as a necessary break from life. It was honestly great outside the general fear of what was happening. Story 73. It's no secret. All of it. I work in hospitality and have always worked through illness. I got to actually stay home. After quarantine, if I got sick again, it was encouraged that I stay home. This was unheard of in that industry. Story 74. I carried a letter in my vehicle because my company was involved in the medical field. There was no traffic during my commute to and from work, which was the only benefit. Story 75. Not having to rush anywhere to avoid traffic and having personal space made it feel less stressful. Story 76. Working 3 days a week and getting paid for 5. Getting to work from home. Whenever I went out, there was hardly any traffic. An excuse to stay home. Felt more free. Story 77. Going for a walk around my neighborhood, where there are mostly roads and few cars, was truly peaceful. When I reached the forest roads, I saw deer relaxing instead of hiding. Story 78. I hated not being able to go out with people in public, but I begrudgingly realized I liked being at home after I cleaned the entire basement by myself, while listening to music and enjoying 1 or 2 beers a day. I would love to return to that life of being unemployed, receiving generous checks, and having nothing to do but stay busy around the house. Story 79. No fear of missing out. As an introvert, it was amazing not to feel pressured to participate just because others were. The extroverted people in my life struggled, but I honestly thrived during the pandemic. I focused on work, had more energy, started exercising again, and had virtual game nights with family. Their personal lives slowed down, allowing me to connect more closely with those who live out of state. Story 80. The fact that you can change your appearance and no one will notice, but then you go out in public and everyone is shocked by how you have changed. Story 81. I fell more in love with my husband. We were dating at the time and living in another state. He was pursuing his master's degree, and I had started a new job. The world became quiet, and so did our minds. It was as if we finally made a deep connection. Story 82. There was nothing else to do, so I spent that entire time riding my bike obsessively. I went from training for 100-mile rides to treating 100-mile rides as training for bigger challenges. The lockdowns resulted in me being in the best shape of my life. Story 83. I got to live my dream of not working and enjoying drinks. I got carried away after a while, but it was fun. I had some enjoyable experiences with LSD a few times as well. Story 84. I am on the spectrum, so this may be counterintuitive, but with all the mask wearing, only people's eyes were visible. I never stopped to notice color or shape prior to the pandemic. Some people have amazingly beautiful eyes. Story 85. Everyone was in the same lonely suffering bubble together. Then the world opened, and they all went back to spending time together without me. Story 86. That it made the world slow down for a while. I can't even stand to watch television shows or movies from before COVID. We were all on a path to early graves. Nothing was ever enough, and everyone expected flawless productivity, constantly striving for more. It's annoying to watch. Story 87. Watching families in our neighborhood spend time together, taking walks and riding bikes, just enjoying each other's company. Story 88. I realized today that I hope quarantine was declared when I already had the interest in honing my talents. The hindrance now is time. There are a lot of things to do, and I can't give myself a break to do the things I want. Story 89. It was socially acceptable to stay at home and try new hobbies. Enjoyable activities such as gardening, baking sourdough, and tending to chickens were encouraged. Story 90. I had to work during quarantine, but the drive to work was amazing. No one tailgate and there were no speeders. I saw a handful of semi-trucks, but that was it. I spent 30 minutes appreciating the view during the drive. Story 91. I finally had the chance to slow down and discover myself. Spending days alone, I was able to process years of built-up emotions during walks, at home, and without the constant pressure of work. I had a valid reason to step back from relationships and evaluate them for what they truly were. I don't think we, as a society, have fully processed how chaotic the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic were. It took people out randomly, like a drive-by. But in the midst of all that, I gained a lot of clarity. Story 92. Strangely, not going to the gym allowed me to work out a lot at home. Not having the barrier of packing a gym bag, driving to the gym, and deciding what to focus on was incredibly freeing. I made the most of the limited equipment I had, and I was arguably fitter than before because I was very consistent. Story 93. My children were all home, and we worked under the same roof. I had not experienced that since they were toddlers. We shared each meal together and took walks in the park every morning, just like when they were little. Story 94. Everything. No need to talk to or see people. Sleeping in every day. The beautiful weather. Most people respected the 6-foot rule. I only had to wear a bra once a week when I went to the shop. Story 95. When the lockdown began, my family had been dealing with cancer for 2 years. There was a sense of gloomy gratification in witnessing everyone else's lives descend into chaos as well. Story 96. I still had to work every day, but we had to check for fever in the morning. Each time I had what they considered a fever, which was 99 degrees, they sent me home for fear of COVID-19. Story 97. I was severely depressed in the 3 to 4 years before COVID-19. I had no plans, no friends, no direction, and no momentum. I felt stagnant, invisible, and hopeless. Then, COVID-19 hit, and suddenly everyone was trapped, isolated, and struggling. I had felt very separated from society, but instead of reintegrating myself, everyone else was forced to my level of despair and anxiety. For some reason, I found comfort in the mass anxiety because I wasn't alone in that way, as awful as it is to admit. Also, wearing a mask meant people couldn't see my chin acne. Story 98. Everyone was always online. I could easily enter a voice channel, and there was a good chance someone would join me to talk. In-person meetups are much harder and involve travel time. I still enjoy them, but I wish some of the online culture had persisted more after quarantine. Story 99. I get to stay home with my baby and work remotely. I spend much more time with him than I did with my second child. Story 100. Being able to be with my husband and kids on holidays without the expectation of getting together with everyone was wonderful. It was nice to just open gifts and let the kids play with their toys instead of going to family gatherings and coming home late at night. Story 101. Not feeling like a second-class citizen for not going out to clubs and socializing almost every night. Story 102. My abusive ex-husband was really nice to me because I was his only source of support. It was the best time of our relationship. Sad now knowing what I know. However, it showed me that I deserve to be treated better and that he could treat me better if he wanted to. Story 103. So many things, and they weren't really secrets. I loved working from home, enjoyed not having to leave the house, appreciated having my family all together, and valued the opportunity to avoid seeing anyone I didn't want to see. I often miss it. Story 104. Literally nothing changed for me. I'm a shut-in who rarely leaves my apartment, let alone my bed, and the fact that I can get almost anything delivered to me is fantastic. Story 105. Attending meetings on Zoom with my camera off versus having to dress up and be stuck in a boardroom for hours. Story 106. I loved all of it. I used to joke that as a germophobic, antisocial hoarder, I was built for the pandemic. I also had adult braces at the time and enjoyed being able to hide behind a mask. Story 107. I had just moved back to the United States after spending my 20s in Asia and was struggling with reverse culture shock and adjusting to life here. I felt mentally disconnected from people, both my friends and the public. Then, suddenly, this event thrust everyone into a similar headspace as mine, wondering, what is going on and how do I live normally? It helped me a lot. Story 108. Fewer crowds at the grocery store, fewer cars on the street, a permanent work-from-home schedule, and not needing to attend social obligations or gatherings. Story 109. Less traffic, fewer people, less social interaction unless necessary, more online class options, and people maintaining distance. Essentially, everything except for the disease itself and the supply chain issues. Story 110. Overtime. I was working for United Parcel Service. There was no downtime, plenty of overtime. The paychecks were nice. I was too busy to overthink anything. Story 111. Working from home is becoming more normalized. Some traditional corporate and federal organizations are trying to force employees back to the office for various reasons, but for employees, working from home is much more sensible and significantly more convenient. Story 112. No casual conversations. During the pandemic, everyone wore a mask, stood 6 feet away, and didn't speak to each other because they feared getting sick. Now, when I go into a store, there is always someone who wants to strike up a random conversation with me, and I dislike it. I just want to go to Walmart and get paper towels in peace. Story 113. I didn't have to make up any excuses to stay home. Now, I struggle to even go to the grocery store. Story 114. I ordered a virtual reality headset as soon as I realized we were in it for the long haul. I highly recommend everyone try playing Beat Saber or other fitness and dance games in virtual reality at some point, as they do not induce motion sickness since everything is stand-in-place. Additionally, Half-Life Alyx was the best platform and first-person shooter video game experience I have ever had in my life. Story 115. It was not a secret. I loved my 2-month vacation. I used to get migraines frequently, but I haven't had one since. Story 116. I had more time to spend with my children, more time for self-care, and just to be. I took time for myself and truly connected with what I wanted from life. I was able to go on long 2 to 3 hour walks every single day. I finally decided to get a divorce. Story 117. How clear the harbor was. Even the seals came back to play without all the ferries and people around. Story 118. I stopped ordering food from outside and was eating clean food at home. I was not causing any heat damage to my hair. My skin glowed and my hair became healthy without using expensive skincare or hair care products. Story 119. Going to the grocery store with my mask, sunglasses, and noise-canceling headphones on while not having anyone look at me was incredible. Story 120. I got fitter than I have ever been. I only included people I liked in my bubble, and all my meetings were online. As a Swede, I could still go out and see anyone I wanted, but I always had an excuse if I didn't want to, using a slight sniffle as an explanation. I miss it every day except for all the people who died. Story 121. I found out that my former boss lost his very profitable business because he allowed someone with COVID-19 to come in. He had to shut it down for almost 2 months to sanitize everything. I also learned that his biggest money-making employees quit. The last time I was there, it was empty. Greed and foolishness at its finest. I truly appreciate karma. Story 122. Checks from the government, not working at a job I hated, never went back after COVID. Time for introspection. I got really into psychedelics during this time and it changed my life, and the number of people who became enlightened during this period. Story 123. At first, no one could go outside unless you had a dog that needed walking. Even then, you had to stay away from other people with dogs. It was heaven. My dog could run around me freely. I didn't have to worry about other people or Even worse, children. I didn't have to worry about other dogs. It was so peaceful and quiet. There were no cars on the roads and no people on the sidewalks. Felt like night, but during the day. I almost took joy in leaving the house. Walks were pleasurable, not a chore. I felt genuinely sad when I started noticing more and more people showing up. The world was mine. Story 124. I was unemployed when the pandemic hit, and a silver lining for me was that I had an excuse for not being able to find a job for a while. I had actually done an interview a couple of hours before the lockdown order was issued. Story 125. Working in a grocery store was overall quite challenging for me, but I appreciated that college courses switched to online formats. Wearing masks to conceal my expression was an added benefit. Story 126. Honestly, most of it is straightforward. I got laid off from a job I hated, and unemployment paid me more than I earned. The whole world shut down, but it didn't change my social life much, if at all. I was always busy beforehand and didn't have much of a healthy social life. I still did almost everything I did before. I couldn't go to the gym. Traffic died down and nobody was out. All of my favorite restaurants started offering takeout, so now I can call full restaurants ahead and get my food as quickly as fast food. The only downside was that without the gym, no job, and a drop in income, I ended up buying a lot of junk food, became inactive, and gained a lot of weight. But that wasn't solely due to quarantine. As an introvert and homebody, it was generally a good thing for me. Luckily, my family and I didn't get sick, at least not in 2020. The problem is it made a lot of people realize things I had already figured out. You don't need to be physically present if you work on a computer. Most jobs are meaningless. The government can't shut your life down out of nowhere. Story 127. Working until 3 a.m. with my colleagues in different time zones allows me to sleep in the next day. I have so much open-ended, pure focus time that I don't get in a normally structured day. However, it has wreaked havoc on my mental health and work-life balance. Story 128. Everyone collectively shared the same experience. It was the only time of chaos I can remember when there was a mutual understanding among all. Story 129. The quietness. If I had to go to the store, it wasn't overwhelmingly loud, and there were no crowds to contend with. Story 130. My children went to my sister's house 2 states away for several weeks to babysit my nephews when everyone was suddenly out of school and working from home. My husband and I felt like teenagers again while they were gone. We enjoyed drinks, took afternoon naps, ordered takeout, and watched Tiger King. It was strange but so much fun. Story 131. I worked fully remote. I rented out my home in the countryside to a person from the city, moved to a more affordable place with internet, and made a good income while living in a much better location. Story 132. The golf courses were wide open, and there was something blocking the hole that you just hit with your ball. Many birdies were made at first, but then everyone decided it would be a good time to start playing. Story 133. My husband and I were both laid off. We were receiving unemployment benefits. Our children were doing school from home. Everything was closed, so we saved money. We had the chance to be at home as a family without the stress of going out. I dislike that COVID-19 occurred and devastated many lives, but I appreciated the opportunity it gave us to spend time together as a family for about 3 to 4 months. Story 134. Not having to work, staying at home, and spending time with my dog and boyfriend felt like paradise. There were no obligations and no one trying to hang out. Story 135. I liked that no one else had other plans. Everyone was at home and bored, just like me. I spent a lot of time doing things online with friends and family, connecting over chat or playing a game. Now everyone is too busy to do things like that anymore. Story 136. As an essential worker, I greatly appreciated the note I carried, instructing all law enforcement to allow me to go about my business. Story 137. The peaceful surroundings, empty roads, breathable air, and quiet environment require people to stand far apart. Story 138. Morning walks with my husband on workdays, making breakfast, and working from home in my sweats, playing with the cat, learning about container gardening, communicating with people more because we were isolated. The whole planet was kinder then. Now, look at the hateful place this country has become. I miss the peace. Story 139. I thought I was an extrovert until the pandemic. My routine, cooking, and small social circle kept me thriving in the predictability. However, I had recently come out of an abusive relationship, allowing me the time to heal and be alone. Story 140. My daughter had just turned 1, and working from home allowed me to spend time with her. It was lovely. Story 141. That quarantine Christmas was the calmest, quietest Christmas I've ever had, and for that, I'll cherish it. Story 142. It was quiet. There were very few people on the streets, little car noise, and no loud disturbances at night. Story 143. Being able to sit down in one place for a bit makes me appreciate relaxation more. Life is so fast-paced. Story 144. Not having to go out, and when I did, nobody was standing too close to me. I wish people still respected the 6-foot rule. Story 145. Reminded me of the work we did during lockdown. Each step in this project was completed independently, with none of us meeting or communicating except for sending the work. Story 146. I met many of my neighbors and became close friends with some of them. Since everyone was working from home, we all walked our dogs at the same time every day. At 8 a.m., we would head out for our morning walk, and then at 5 p.m., we would go out again for the afternoon walk. Waking up to the sounds of birds outside instead of traffic was also very pleasant. Story 147. Not working and still getting paid. People are realizing how important my job is. Taking care of other people's kids so they can go to work is not easy. Story 148. I was considered a key worker, but not enough for anyone to appreciate it, so I went into the office every day. Being able to sit on a bus in peace was wonderful. There were no school children or elderly people delaying the buses, and no crowded buses on the way to work. It was a great experience. Story 149. Working side by side with my now ex-wife while working from home was wonderful. I miss her, but when the quarantine ended and I received my new assignment, I fell into a depressive state. I felt like I wasn't good enough for her to keep around. Story 150. Empty streets, and while I didn't get to work from home, my job had all employees more spread out. I got to get away from my annoying supervisor. Story 151. My boss laid me off. I ended up making more money from unemployment. I informed him that he could have received more money from the government if he hadn't laid me off. Story 152. Working in my underwear, eating whatever I liked all day long, and not having to see some people's faces in person as often. Story 153. Covering my face and keeping people 6 feet away from me was truly amazing. I still cover my face, but I occasionally receive looks. Story 154. I wore masks wherever I went during the pandemic. I entered it as an insecure high schooler who always wore a lot of makeup, which I disliked but felt I had to wear because of my acne. Now, I rarely wear more than lipstick and a bit of mascara. I can leave the house without wearing any makeup at all, something I couldn't do for years until the pandemic. I became so accustomed to not wearing makeup and wearing a mask everywhere. Story 155. The Great Resignation reminded many people of how necessary even relatively unskilled workers are. Story 156. Finally, I stopped worrying about the issues that troubled me because the world temporarily paused, which made things easier and clearer to understand, as scary as it was. Story 157. I was a recluse, and finally being able to feel like I wasn't a freak or inhuman was really nice. I started going out more and more, kind of like everyone was put back at square one, and I wasn't left behind this time, if that makes sense. Story 158. Not attending all these random relatives' weddings. He's your cousin's wife's brother-in-law. Who cares? Story 159. It's no secret. Everyone who knows me understands it was one of the happiest times of my life. My teenagers were home again, enjoying pizza and movie nights as well as game nights. The beach was almost empty, and we took 2 walks each day with nothing to do but spend quality family time together. Story 160. I live in a senior apartment complex with a fantastic dining room. We had room service for every meal. Story 161. I remember being outside with my youngest daughter when we looked up and saw a plane, the first one we had seen that week. We were so surprised. Story 162. Secretly, I loved everything about it. Staying home without people. What a time. Introverts thrived. Story 163. I really enjoyed it because I experience extreme anxiety whenever I leave the house. There's a constant sense of impending doom, so I didn't feel pressured to go out. I appreciated the time to work on myself, and it forced me to slow down and take a break. Story 164. Not leaving the house and, if we had to, wearing masks and practicing social distancing, my agoraphobic and self-conscious self somewhat enjoyed quarantine. Story 165. I loved it. It was so much fun just being with my daughters. It was undoubtedly stressful at times, but it was wonderful. Story 166. At the very start of COVID-19 and during its peak, the grocery store was completely empty. It was incredible. Items were often out of stock, which meant you couldn't always find the exact products you were looking for, and sometimes had to settle for a different option or brand. However, it was quite enjoyable shopping in a large grocery store with only about 20 other people. Additionally, there was much less traffic. Story 167. I'm not even that unattractive, but for me it was the masks. I loved the anonymity provided by wearing the mask. Story 168. I enjoyed getting paid to do nothing and the idea of it. I worked a fast-paced job, and most days I was nonstop. I felt more liberated being stuck in my house than outside of it. Story 169. My commute was much calmer. It was a great time to work in home sales. I didn't actually go inside, just walked through people's properties with them. Story 170. Literally everything is affected except for places closing early, especially since the area I live in hasn't really recovered from that. Story 171. I started my job in the emergency room right as COVID began. At first, everyone was scared to come in unless it was something major, so we would often go home early due to the low number of patients. Story 172. The fact that I was the designated shopper and errand runner allowed me to escape the house alone when someone needed something. I took as long as possible because my family environment was at its worst during COVID-19 due to my ex-stepfather working from home. As soon as the lockdown lifted, my mom and I left that house for good. Story 173. Nothing. It was traumatizing. I won't even scroll through this post as it's so triggering for me. That time in our lives was difficult. Goodbye. Story 174. Having a solid excuse to decline gatherings. I now find new reasons to say no to most events because socializing requires much more energy than I gain from it. Story 175. No school, but I can still keep in touch with my friends. I did a bit of homeschooling and online schooling, but I did not have a consistent schedule. Story 176. Not having to make up excuses not to meet people is a relief. I consider myself a sociable person, but sometimes I just want to be left alone. Unfortunately, people do not seem to understand this as it differs from my usual behavior, and they assume something is wrong with me, prompting them to reach out. When I tell them to stop, they often do it even more. They are genuinely trying to help, and should I ever find myself in need of friends, I appreciate knowing there will be people there for me. However, as much as I like the way my life is going, it can be very exhausting at times. The lockdown turned out to be an unexpected but much-needed break from it all for me. Story 177. The money. I still had to work, but I had so much extra after the bars closed that involved gambling. I'm an addict. I know. I became addicted to sipping on the front porch and building models during that time. Tamiya profited a bit from me then. Story 178. I don't know if it's done secretly, but openly and semi-openly, everyone used COVID as an excuse to focus more on their own lives while neglecting responsibilities toward banks, governments, and institutions. We temporarily experienced the fun and freedom of just being and not worrying about deadlines and timely filings. COVID was the ideal excuse for procrastination, and it was remarkable. We could focus on ourselves. Story 179. We were discussing this earlier this week. On a personal level, I got to go for a walk every day with the kids. We had dinner together most nights because they weren't dashing off to do various sports, clubs, or revision sessions. At a work level, we were initially closed to customers for 9 weeks. We offered curbside pickup, which was strictly regulated. Customers checked in online to collect their orders and stayed in their cars. We would drop the order 6 feet away and leave. Once inside, customers could get out and load it into their vehicles. If assistance was needed, they had to bring someone in their household bubble with them. Our working hours changed. We worked from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. rather than 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. This meant more colleagues were available to pick the online orders. So stress levels dropped despite being in a global pandemic. The UK weather was glorious, so even if you were scheduled until 6 p.m., it was still warm enough to take the kids to the park to let off steam. Story 180. I could call off work or appointments because I was feeling sick and didn't want to spread COVID. Even though I wasn't actually sick, I just wanted to deep clean or relax at home. Story 181. I was actually amazing at online school, despite having attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. My guess is that attending school in person burned me out every day over multiple weeks, so I couldn't bring myself to work on homework and similar tasks. However, when class is minimal and I am still learning just as much, I can easily complete assignments right when I receive them and experience no burnout. I dislike homework intensely. Nothing should ever have to be done at home. I don't know the educational effects of eliminating homework, including major projects, but I really don't care because I just dislike doing work outside of school. It's a ridiculous idea, and I am not fond of whoever came up with it. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.